Good morning and welcome to Rising. We've got another great show for you today. Hello, Brianna.
Hello, Robbie.
Well, we've got a couple great guests, so let's break them down for the gang.
Yes, well, we're in a few minutes about to talk to Sabrina Salvati about what's going on with the black vote, and you should definitely stick around later in the show where we have a really great, informative interview with Matt Taibbi where he unpacks what's been going on in this really important First Amendment Supreme Court case. We'll also be talking about the Sunday night raid of Al-Shifa Hospital and competing claims about whether the hospital, which has become a refuge for about 30,000 patients, medical workers, and displaced persons, was in fact a legitimate target. That attack preceded Biden's call with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on Monday, in which he urged stronger assurance that humanitarian assistance will be delivered to Gaza. That was the first contact between the pair in a month.
And as Brianna mentioned, we'll be talking about the SCOTUS case, Murthy v. Missouri, which we've been following very closely at Rising, and deals a lot with how much pressure the federal government will be able to bring to bear against social media companies in the future. But first, voters of color have come out in droves for Democrats in past election cycles, even helping to turn a traditionally red state, Georgia, blue in 2020. But new data reveals the percentage of non-white voters fleeing Dems is increasing. As writer Nate Silver pointed out, Democrats are hemorrhaging support with voters of color, pointing to a Financial Times analysis that shows President Biden's margin against Donald Trump with Hispanic voters cratering from 24 points in 2020 to just 7 points. Now, only 55% of black voters report it's supporting Biden now, compared to 83% that did so in 2020. Here to discuss what's driving this so-called racial realignment is Sabrina Salvati, host of the Sabs podcast. Welcome back to the show, Sabrina.
Good morning. Thanks so much for having me on.
Yeah, we're glad to have you. So give us your take on this latest news. I know we've had you on in the past to discuss this, but it seems like the trend continues to be very bad for President Biden, no?
It's true. As much as the Biden administration likes to brag about the economy, the reality is black voters are seeing that the economy is not doing well. When I spoke to black voters, particularly in the Roxbury neighborhood of Boston, they mentioned two issues, the economy and immigration. In reference to the economy, they're worried about the rising costs of housing. Rent is continuing to increase, and also grocery prices are increasing. Usually I would tell people during a time of crisis, obviously, if you're trying to budget, you should avoid eating out and you should grocery shop and cook instead because it's so much cheaper. But we are seeing, and I'm seeing this every week I go to the grocery store, that the grocery prices are continuing to increase as well. And I think we also have to remember last year, the Biden administration actually cut the SNAP benefits. So that actually affected a lot of people in black communities as well. But they're worried about the economy. They're worried about putting food on the table. They're worried about the cost of rent, and they don't see improvement in reference to those areas. Now, Joe Biden likes to brag about the unemployment rate. He continues to say that the unemployment rate has decreased. A part of that is because Joe Biden actually removed people from unemployment. We have to go back to that eviction moratorium during that time where he decided to actually kick people off of unemployment. So that is a part of that reduction in the unemployment rate. But then the other concern that I've heard, particularly from residents in Roxbury, is immigration. There have been a number of migrants that Governor Healy actually has housed in black communities that actually just do not have the resources to take care of that population. And some of the frustration that they've shared is, why aren't you actually trying to house them in the white communities that do have the resources to take care of them? So there's a lot of frustration there. There were actually migrants that were brought into a recreation center in Roxbury, and now that means that black residents in that neighborhood can no longer use the rec center as long as they are housed there. And so what you're seeing across the country is a lot of black voters are feeling really frustrated, and they're starting to ask, what about us?
So it's certainly not the first time that non-white voters have experienced economic precarity or felt ignored by the two corporate parties. But historically, it seems to have been the case that the fear of the other, whether it is implicit or explicit policies from the right that are racially targeted and are perceived to be or actually hurt the interests of black and brown people in the country, have kept black voters in particular really solidly in the Democratic fold, the legacy of the civil rights movement, et cetera, and the Democrats' willingness to embrace those policies while the Republicans were segregationists and the like, seems to have lasted up until this point as an effective mechanism to keep the overwhelming majority of black voters voting Democrat. One, I want to ask you, it's what has caused a shift in this election where we have twice as many black voters saying that they're willing to vote for Donald Trump as they did back in 2016? And then second, I'd ask you, do you think these polls are really reflective of what we're going to see come election time?
Most voters that I spoke to said that they are going to sit this election out. That's just the reality. Most voters are not going to support Joe Biden or Donald Trump or the third party and independent candidates. Most of them are going to stay at home because they don't feel like the politicians, regardless of the party, are helping them regardless. But I think the problem is some of the voters that I spoke to actually did support Joe Biden in 2020, and they were expecting to see some type of change economically and financially for the black community, and they're saying that is not the case. So now they're like, we had Donald Trump and we've had Joe Biden, and so they just feel like we've had both parties back to back, and neither one of them are really impacting the black community the way that they said that they would. Joe Biden made a number of promises to African American voters, and particularly with younger black voters, it's a little bit different. They're still concerned about the economy, but also there's the war in Gaza. So younger black voters tend to be more concerned about the genocide that's taking place in Gaza, or particularly those that are college educated or those who just graduated from college. And there's also this issue of underemployment. Joe Biden is talking about unemployment, but I think a lot of people are not talking about the study that was just released from Inside Higher Ed, which talks about the majority of college graduates today are underemployed. That means they are actually getting jobs, but the jobs they are overqualified for. But they're taking those positions because they have to pay the bills. So that's another issue that I think a lot of younger black voters are dealing with. But I think people are just tired of feeling like there's a lot of promises that are made to their communities. There's also a lot of pandering that happens, more so from the Democratic Party, but they're not delivering on results.
Yeah, that underemployment issue is very interesting. Actually, Inside Higher Ed has been highlighting that a lot over the years in terms of people emerging from college and then getting a job, but not one. They put all that time and effort and money, being in debt because they took out loans, and then to get a job that you didn't technically need the entire college education to do seems like a really perverse incentive and structure that we're pushing that so much. I wanted to go back to a comment you made earlier about how immigration could be potentially affecting black voters. I think that's a really novel, insightful observation, and not something that's talked about so much. Immigration portrayed as a very or concerns about excessive immigration or illegal immigration being coded as a very conservative or right-wing cause. Could you speak more to how that's impacting the black community?
Yes, so I've spoken to voters particularly in the Roxbury neighborhood in Boston. They're very upset about this. What has been said to me is that they see that the city is actually doing a number of things for the migrant community that they're not even willing to do for the black community. So that's been some of the frustration that they voiced. But it's not just Boston. This is happening in Chicago. This is happening in New York. I've seen a number of people actually interview black voters in Chicago who have had town halls about this as well. They're really frustrated, and they said, where's our free housing? Where's our free credit cards so that we can go out and buy food and supplies for our families? So I think what is happening is a lot of black voters are seeing, regardless if it's a Democrat politician or Republican politician, other groups are being put before the black community. And I think this could be the time where there could be some real concessions that could be made. My advice to people is, this is the time. This is the time to ask for real concessions. If you support reparations for American descendants of slavery, this is the time to ask for it. The same way that the Muslim community is withholding their vote for Joe Biden, and they're actually casting the uncommitted votes or no preference, which is what it was in Massachusetts. This is the time to ask for real concessions. And since Joe Biden is actually up for re-election, those concessions should be implemented prior to November, not another promise that's made to the Black community that is not fulfilled. So I sincerely hope that people would ask for some concessions for those who still want to support the Democratic Party. But me, ultimately, I won't support either party. I'd support third party or independent candidates because I think the system as a whole has to change. And I think both of those parties are corporate and corrupt.
Thank you, Sabrina Salvati. You can check her out at the Sabby Sabs podcast over on the Revolutionary Blackout Network. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you so much.